daf is daf Memhei 45, and we pick up at the bottom of Mem Daled Amud Bet, and we're dealing with the issue about somebody that goes chutz l'tchum. The first Mishnah spoke about going chutz l'tchum because of an anus, you were forced outside of the tchum. And this Mishnah talks about going out because of a mitzvah. It doesn't speak or with permission. Mish gets a pershus, so it doesn't amplify what that is. We'll see about that in the Gemara. And there it says you actually have 2,000 amot. So the question now that's being debated in the Gemara between Rabbi and Rav Shimi Barchia is what happens if you, case of the Mishnah, you went out, you found out that you're no longer needed, your services are no longer needed, you have 2,000 amot from where you are. Well, how does that relate to your original place where you started? And the debate is, if you stepped outside your original 2,000 amot from your home, here's your home, and here's you, and you went there, and you went, and yeah, this piece of paper is like, whatever, this is like your original tchum, okay, and you went over here. So is it now you have 2,000 amot? So does that 2,000 amot get you back to your house, right? Or no? Or you just have this? It doesn't combine with your previous tchum. So the first position was that you basically have your new tchum. I'm sorry. The first position was that if you're within the 2,000 amot, so then you really can already get back to your house. Then you revert back to your old tchum. But if you leave the 2,000 amot, then you just have your new tchum. That was the first position. The other position says no, even if you leave the 2,000 amot, because they overlap, okay, that allows you to go back to your house. And according to one version in Rashi, not only does it allow you to go back to your house because they overlap, it gives you actually both tchumim. So you can go back to your house and get all the way back here, and you can get from your new place all the way forward. You actually have the combination of the two tchumim. So that is the question. Once you leave the original 2,000 amot, do you get? Are you able to have the overlap allow you to get back, even to get back to your house, and maybe even give you both? Okay, and that's so the Gemara picks up now the last line of Mem Daled Amud Bet with that discussion. Okay, so it says last four words. V'heichadlo shavat. Low. So the Gemara says if you actually started Shabbat within a walled space and had been talking about a cave, then obviously that would be different, because then that would mean that the entire space, even if it was extremely large, would be like one space. But are you meaning to tell me without that special case, you would not say this idea of overlap? V'hatna, on top of Mem Hamad Aleph, we taught in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, this is the Rabbi Eliezer we quoted earlier, Shtayim yikanes, Gimel lo yikanes. So if he steps, Rabbi Eliezer says your 4 amot are 2 amot in each direction. And if somebody steps over the 2,000 amma line in a normal case, within 2 amot of the 2,000 amma line, if he stepped over, he can go back. Okay, why? Because his 2 amot, which he has now that he overstepped, will overlap with the 2,000 amot, and that will allow him to come back. More than that, 3 amot, he's already completely outside. Even his 2 amot won't get an overlap, and he cannot enter back. So, my law isn't the explanation here. Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, Rabbi Eliezer is going according to his reasoning. Damar v'hu be'emtza'an, the 4 amot, he's in the middle of them, so there's 2 amot in each direction. V'arba amot yovi le'rabanan, and those 4 amot the rabbis gave him, kiman demivlin domu, it's like they are absorbed, or I'll say overlap, with the 2,000 amot. V'kam yikanes, and you can enter into your 2,000 amot and go all the way back home. So you see that if you have a new tchum and it overlaps with your old, you're allowed to go back into your old. Okay, and certainly you can get back home and you can have your old tchum. And maybe, as we're saying, maybe you have both, but certainly you also have your old one. So you see, Alma Havlos Tchumim Milsahi, you see absorption, or again, overlap of the Tchumim is significant and allows you to minimally restore your old Tchum. So Amalei Rabbi Bar Bar Chana L'Abaye, so Rabbi Bar Bar Chana said back to Abaye, Mida Rabbi Eliezer Kamos Aftalei Lamar, you're challenging the master, meaning it was Rabbi, I believe. Rabbi, you're challenging Rabbi from Rabbi Eliezer, so maybe the rabbis disagree exactly for that reason. Maybe the rabbis say when you step over the 2,000, you can't go back, because that's exactly what they debate, that they actually are saying that you don't allow the overlap to be significant. So maybe that's exactly the debate, and maybe we like the Chachamim, and the overlap doesn't get you anywhere. So Amar Lei, he said back to him, yes, I'm going to bring my proof from Rabbi Eliezer to Shmieli Minei Damar, because I heard from the master, from the same Rabbah, I heard from him, Ad Kam Lo Pligi Rabbanan Leit Rabbi Eliezer El Dvar Rishus. When do they argue that the overlap doesn't help you? That's only when you overstepped, you went outside of the Tchum for a discretionary matter, meaning meaning that you really weren't supposed to step outside the tchum. It's funny because our Mishnah speaks about Mishayatza birashus, but here rishus here meant that it was your choice and there was not a mitzvah, and therefore they say the overlap doesn't help you. Avalidvar mitzvah, if you stepped outside the tchum for a mitzvah purpose, like in our Mishnah, which is why you have 2,000 amot when you leave, not four amot, then module they would agree. So his tradition was that this debate of when you step outside the tchum normally, and you have 4 amot, can that 4 amot get you back into the tchum or not when you go beyond the 2,000 because of the overlap? He said that's not a principled debate of whether the overlap works. That's a question of whether we're going to let it work in this case because you shouldn't have gone chutz l'tchum. But in our Mishnah, when you're allowed to go chutz l'tchum, and you actually have 2,000 amot when you leave, okay, if that creates an overlap, then everybody would agree that you'd be allowed to go back home. And according to one version of Rashi, not just go back home, you might even be allowed to have both tchumim. So to go, or maybe even up to 8,000 amot, because both points would be your acceptable tchum. Yes.
We haven't done it yet, but at some point we're going to actually define in an unwalled city what is the city limit.
Yes, that is coming up. Okay, now. I should say before we go on, I do want to mention one thing because I did a little checking yesterday. First of all, we mentioned in yesterday's daf, right, that the whole question, this is the important issue about, right, do we rule like Rabbi Gamliel by dir v'sohar, right? Somebody goes outside the tchum and then they find themselves in a walled space. And the example, the very relevant example I gave was your plane landed on Shabbos, and now you can totally step off the plane and be straight into the airport or into that what do you call the thing again? That way. So totally in a walled space. Do we rule like? So first of all, there's an issue of yesh tchumim l'mala mi'asara, but also there's an issue about do we rule like Rabbi Gamliel that says that even if you didn't start in the walled space, you're allowed the entire walled space. And so yesterday's daf, right? If you'll remember, at one stage the Gemara says when it speaks about making the wall about people, it says how well, of course, the wall would work because Rav says we rule like Rabbi Gamliel and that a wall works. So why do we assume we're going like Rav? So anyway, that's one of the proofs that we showed him bring that because the Gemara takes it for granted that position of Rav that we rule like Rabbi Gamliel that is the halacha, that even if you enter into a walled space, if you're in a walled space after you went out chutz l'tchum, that you actually are given the entire walled space. Now I do also want to mention 2 other just important points before we move on about that. One is the issue, if you remember, that we're speaking about walled space, the Mishnah also mentioned at the beginning of the parak, it says so if after you're leaving your 2,000 amot, this is talking about that you were forcibly removed, you were placed into a barn, that's the dir v'sohar, but the first thing says, or to another city. So what's the case of the other city? So this is an important debate of the Rishonim. A number of Rishonim in the Shulchan Aruch rule that only means a walled city. So it's just another example of being placed in a walled enclosure. But the Ramban and other Rishonim rule, and some even are willing to rely on this, b'shas hadachak, that it means even an unwalled city. Because the same way when I start Shabbos in a city, I have the entire city doesn't count against my 2,000 amot, counts as one space. If I was taken out chutz l'tchum and deposited in a city, even an unwalled city, according to some Rishonim, I can go the entire city. So that has a huge implication because now the whole issue about like landing in an airport, and we said, what if you have to walk on the tarmac, getting off of a boat, and so on? No longer is it an issue about being in a walled enclosure. As long as you were brought into a city and it was forcibly, you were on the plane. You didn't mean for you didn't the plane got delayed. You didn't control it or whatever. So that actually would have the same halacha. The airport, well, I mean, you look at a map and whatever, but if for tchumim purposes, it's part of the city. Right, a lot are. Right. Anyway, so that's very important, those 2 things, because that does come up particularly with like delayed planes and and boats and other types of issues, those 2 cases. And the last thing I'll just mention is the issue that Michael kept on asking. He said this idea that you can go the entire space, if you're in a walled enclosure. The Mishnah says when you were forcibly extracted, and put in. And he said, well, what if you willfully did that? So, my response was, no. The Mishnah's emphasis of forcibly is because of the case that when you were then forcibly brought back, you go back to square one. but not for the issue about being put in an enclosure. Actually, it's machlokas rishonim, that question. And so if you willfully leave and then find yourself, which again does not mean that you chose to get on the flight and then the flight got delayed. It means that you actually planned, to fly over Shabbos and land or whatever. If you willfully did it, then it's a machlokas rishonim whether you can walk in the entire enclosed space. So that's an actual debate exactly about that point. So that's just a little practical halacha. Again, this really comes up in the questions about delayed flights. Okay, let's now continue in the Gemara. Now we're talking about leaving L'dvar Harishus, where you actually have a mitzvah, and you have a new 2,000 amot, and if it overlaps, then according to the emphasis, the upshot of the previous discussion, you would get to actually go back to your original city. So now, now the end of the Mishnah says, and anybody who goes out to save, can go back to their original place. So the Gemara is bothered, because originally the Mishnah sounds like you just have 2,000 amot. This seems like a blanket allowance to go home. Which one is it, 2,000 amot or a blanket allowance to go home? So the Gemara says, "V'afilu tuva, even a lot. V'hamarta reisha," but the beginning said, "Apaimam avatulo," that when you go out, you have a new 2,000 amot. And if you wind up, by the way, I should say, in a new city, you went out to help somebody, give birth or something like that, then you're like the new city, so you have the whole city in 2,000 amot. But fine, but you have your new space. It's not that you can go back regardless. So v'tulo and not more. So how come the end of the Mishnah says you can always go back? So Amarav Yehuda Amarav. It's not meaning to say to challenge the idea of 2,000 amot. What it's coming to do is to tell you even a bigger kula in a different area. That if you went out lahatzil is to save someone, and save here has particularly the connotation of save from being attacked by the enemy. So you went out with your weapons. Now you can actually go back with your weapons, even though you'll be carrying. Even go 2,000 amot. We're not extending necessarily, although I'll get back to that in a minute. We're not necessarily extending the amount you can travel, but what we're saying is you can even carry your weapons back with you, and it's a matering carrying. Now, why is it matering? Why? Yeah, I know. So it's a good question. So I will answer. I will tell you. Well, let me just sort of say the reason it's matering carrying. This is not a hitiru sofan mishum tchilasan. It specifically, as we're going to see, is because if you were fighting the enemy, even if you think you've won the battle, as soon as you deposit your weapons, you're obviously exposing yourself. So you can remain armed even at the end to continue to protect yourself until you get home. So that's the emphasis. So Michael says, so why does it say lim komam? So actually, although the Gemara isn't clear about this, lahalacha, we rule that in this case, yes, because of the issue that you're fighting the enemy, you can go all the way home. The 2,000 amot is when you leave for other reasons. When you leave to fight the enemy, then no matter how far you went, you're allowed to go home, and you're allowed to carry your weapons with you. Although the Gemara didn't emphasize that point. Yes, because it's pikuach nefesh. Okay, so
carry your weapons home is not because
yes, well, that's what we're going to see. It is because then, as soon as you deposit your weapons, if the enemy's still out there, even if they've ran away, as soon as you deposit your weapons, you're inviting a new attack. So let's read the Gemara a little bit, and then I'll take the questions. Okay, Umay Kusha. Now the Gemara said, why was this whole thing a problem anyway? You said, the end of the Mishnah says you can go back regardless, and the beginning said 2,000 amot. Maybe, meaning I didn't even understand the question to begin with. It's obvious what the difference is. When you're going out for other reasons, you have 2,000 amot. When you're going out to defend against attack, then you can always go back. So there wasn't even a problem. Lahatzi was, that was what made it clearly different. Ella ikasha hakasha. So this is really what led to the problem, which then led to the answer about carrying your weapons. We have a Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, which is quite interesting. That's where it spells out why you can go chutz l'tchum, not here in Eiruvin. And here's what the Mishnah says. Originally, when the Eidim came, the witnesses came to testify in the new moon, and they came on Shabbos. So once they got to where they needed to get to, they couldn't leave the courtyard. They couldn't leave where they were, because, they went chutz l'tchum, and they had not yet established a special exception of somebody who left for a dvar mitzvah. So he can Rabbi Gamliel Azaken, so the Rabbi Gamliel the elder may establish a takana, sheyesh lahen al payim amalecho ruach, But these witnesses have 2,000 amot because they went for a licit purpose to testify about the new moon. V'lo elu bilvad amru, and when they did this, they did not just say about these people. El afilu chachama haba leleid, even a midwife who's coming to help a woman give birth. V'aval hatzil min hagayus min hanahar min hapolet, somebody who's coming to save people from an attacking army or from a river that's that's flooding, or from a building that's collapsing. I mean, a lake or a fire. So you're like on the volunteer fire brigade. You become, if you enter into a new city as a result, you become like the people of the city. In 2000. What this adds, by the way, about the 2000 is that if you've entered into a new city, then you get the whole city plus 2000, not just 2000. Okay, so now we have a problem though, because here it clearly includes the case of lahatzio, to save somebody from armies, right, from an attack. And it says 2,000 amot. And our Mishnah says if you end at lahatzio, you can go all the way back home. So which is it? Okay, so you can't just say lahatzio is different, because we have one case of lahatzio that's 2,000, and our Mishnah lahatzio that says you can go back. So the Gemara says, "Apayim amalakol ruach v'tulo." What? Just 2,000 and not more? V'amarta kol yotzim lahatzio chozim limkomam afilu tuva. The Mishnah says you can go back home even a lot. So Amar Rav Yud Amar Rav shechozim b'klei zaynam limkomam. No, that means carrying their weapons. So according to this approach, actually it would be an interesting mix. Yes, you're limited to 2,000 amot, but you're allowed to actually not violate, but you're allowed to carry your weapons because of pikuach nefesh. This is obviously would be assuming that you don't need to go all the way back home for pikuach nefesh purposes. Okay, so the idea of travel, that'll be limited to 2,000 amot. The idea when our Mishnah says you can go back, it's really funny because it's not really talking about the idea of going and tchumim. It's really talking about the idea of carrying, and you can carry your weapons. Okay, and now the Gemara is going to elaborate on this. Like we taught in the Brisa. They used to leave their weapons in the house near the city wall after they fought off the attack. So one time the enemies recognized that they had deposited their weapons, even presumably after the battle. It's quite interesting, by the way, I must say, to imagine what the historical circumstances of all of this is. Like a group of Jewish, soldiers fighting off non-Jews in the time the Mishnah is being written. Like, what are we talking about? Are we talking about Hashmonayim times? That's the only time I could imagine that this is that this would be actual practical. Okay, what?
The Roman invasion?
Yeah, when they laid siege to Yerushalayim?
Yeah.
Did you actually have?
Or the Bar Kokhba revolt?
Maybe the Bar Kokhba revolt. I don't know, because most of the time they were fighting like a guerrilla warfare, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a troop that was running after or something. You'd have to try to it's fascinating to try to guess what the circumstances were. Okay. Anyway, Hikir B'Ema Oivim, so the enemies recognized that they were unarmed. V'Rad Acharayim, and they chased after them. V'Nichnesu Lito Klei, so they went back to this house, to this armory to get their weapons. V'Nichnesu Oivim Acharayim, and the enemy was chasing after them. So the Jews who were going to get their weapons started, pushing one another to get to their weapons. And they killed one another in the sort of fight to get their weapons more than what the enemies killed them. This is, by the way, a trope, which is quite interesting, which maybe is meant as like a musar, that it happens a number of times, right? You remember that the shoes with the nails, that they thought the enemy was there, and then they were all pushing to get out, and they wound up, killing one another. And you have the case about the fighting for the lulavs. Remember that? That story about how they used to leave their lulavs and they would fight for the lulavs. Things to be like a musar here about how the infighting, we do ourselves more harm. We're our own worst enemy, more than what the enemy does. What? Right. So anyway, okay. So therefore, ba'osu shahid kinu. At that moment, they established you chozim lim kamam b'klei zaynam. They can actually keep their weapons on until they got back safely and securely home. Okay. So according to this, the 2,000 amot limit might apply, assuming it's not a pikuach nefesh concern, but you can continue to be armed until you get home. I want to read a few more answers. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar. Now Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says no. There's another difference about whether you have only 2,000 2,000 amot to go home. Put aside the issue of being armed or not. How far can you travel? Is it 2,000 amot or home? So there's a difference. Lo kasha. If who won the battle? If the Jews won the battle, so then you only have 2,000 amot. We don't have to let you get home because, presumably you're in a strong position, especially if we let you keep your arms on you. And the other case is when the non-Jews won. Now again, this is euphemistic, so it says when the non-Jews beat themselves, okay, because it doesn't want to sort of explicitly say the other. But when the non-Jews won, then you obviously can keep, you can go home. You gotta run back so that you can be safe and secure. And then obviously there is no limit. Okay. So did you had a question, Paula?
Yeah, I'm wondering about, it said that in this particular case they made this decree that you can do this.
Right.
And it apparently stayed in force forever.
Right.
So apparently the rabbis, based on one situation,
right,
can issue a decree that would go on forever?
Right, because first of all, there are two types of decree. One is just made a takana, one is like make a takana, which is, they can say, you like the issue about not wearing the shoes on Shabbos. Because of one case that was a crazy case, whatever, we don't let people wear these, shoes with nails on Shabbos. Yes, and it's a rabbinic restriction, and, hopefully it's not too restrictive, but yeah, sometimes they can't do things. Usually they do things because of a more pervasive concern, but they can make it takana, and that's what it is. This is a bigger chiddush because here they're actually allowing chilul Shabbos, but it comes through. The word takana maybe is a little bit funny in this case because it really comes through like a psak, like basically saying we are looking at the situation and assessing that that keeping your weapons on you is a pikuach nefesh consideration. So sure, that's what they can do, and there's like a lot of parameters where they basically say for example, when the rabbis say any type of an injury that's from the gums inward in the mouth is potentially pikuach nefesh, and they just set certain parameters. So that's what's going on here. Yeah.
Can we trace when the halacha became solidified of the 2,000 amma? They can say Barishana.
Yeah, when you mean the earliest sense of when tchumim were established?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the Gemara did originally attribute it to Shlomo. I'm trying to remember if it attributed to Shlomo Erev Chatzeros or even Erev Tchumim. Don't you remember? We had the Gemara, right? It certainly was Erev Chatzeros. I don't remember if it was also Erev Tchumim. But that's the Gemara is just trying to sort of place it, historically. There is no hint. The hint is Ayat Ishmin Komo, right? And the idea that there's an idea of not going out. So the whole idea of Erev Tchumim, that you can place something and extend it, or the idea that, even many Rishonim say that even the opinion that it's Doraisa is 12 meal. So the idea that we shortened it to 1 meal, 2,000 amot. Some say it's not Doraisa, so it would all be rabbinic. Right, so clearly, it was at the Tannaitic times, but exactly when this whole thing started, at which stage, I don't know if there's any evidence. Okay, let's see a little bit further. Yeah?
To Paul's point, that perhaps the case it's referred to as a takana because if you broadcast that the law is such and such, you're not only broadcasting it internally, you're broadcasting it
to the enemy. That's a nice point. So it's important to make that whole point public. That's a very good point. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Okay. Amar Rav Yudah Marav, Nochrim Shetzara al Arayot, so Israel, if the non-Jews besieged Jewish cities, Ein Yotzim Aleim B'Chlei Zainam, Ve'ein Mechalim Aleim Asar Shabbos, you cannot fight them with weapons and leave the city with armed on Shabbos, or violate Shabbos, which is quite shocking, because it seemed to be Pikuach Nefesh, so let's see how the Gemara explains it. Tanya Namihachi, we taught similarly, Nachrim Shetzar, etc. But Medvar Mamorim, but then the bright to their ends and says, when is this true? When they are laying siege because they want, money, meaning you can imagine that the city did not pay its, not tax, what was that thing called? Tribute. If the city didn't pay its tribute, okay, so then you're not allowed to be Mechal Shabbos, pay the money. But if they're coming because actually to for life, meaning either that they're really fighting a war, maybe sometimes you have examples where they're demanding to hand someone over, they want to kill them, okay, and so people's lives are at stake, then then you can fight and violate Shabbos. Now, talking about chronologically, or historically, I should say that the earliest, I think, ever documented evidence of sort of like a Torah Shabbat Peh moment of innovating, a new law. The earliest documented case about that is in the Sefer Hashmonayim, right, where they refused to fight on Shabbos and they got wiped out. And then they said, you know what? I think God wants us to fight on Shabbos and defend ourselves. So that sort of insight that Pikuach Nefesh is Dochas or Shabbos, and when you're fighting the enemy, you can actually fight back on Shabbos. Seems to be the first documented example of Torah Shabbat Peh. Okay, anyway, so that's exactly this. Okay, now, if it's a city that is on the border, even if they did not come for a purpose, for a life, and no lives at risk, even if it's just an issue about straw and stubble, the idea that the city is besieged, if it's a border city, is itself seen as a pikuach nefesh, even if the reason they're besieging it is not because they're looking to kill anyone. Amar Rav Yosef bar Yomi Amar Rav Nachman ubebavel in Babylonia it's like a city near a border, which seems bizarre. First of all, the whole idea that you have Jewish cities in Bavel and so on, and it's hard enough to imagine what the sort of circumstances were in the Mishnah in the time of in Eretz Yisrael. And number two, the whole Babylonia is smucha l'safar. So the Gemara explains it. V'targuma, we explained what that means is Naharda, that the city of Naharda is considered to be a border city. So at least in theory, if that was a Jewish city that was being attacked, then you would be allowed to defend it even on Shabbat, even if it was not about a life being at risk.
The Koran has a note that it was on the border of the Persian Empire for many years and was actually overrun by the Romans a couple of times.
So we did.
And that is actually true. The Romans did conquer all of Babel a couple of times.
Right. Oh, so then it exactly is giving that as an example between Rome and Persia. Very good. So given as an illustration of people can appreciate the importance of border cities.
But there's an interesting judgment here between the Persians and the Romans, right?
That the Romans are always the enemy?
Well, in that time, it's one thing to say that in Eretz Yisrael, when you're defending a Jewish country and so on, but to say that you have a Jewish population in a foreign country, you care that you'd rather have the Persians in charge than the Romans in charge.
Well, that was true. That even at the time of the Gemara, life was much better under the Persians than under the Romans. You're right. It's an interesting question. Is the Gemara just using it as an illustration? Like, for example, if we were the Persians, and Nardo was being attacked, or is the Gemara actually saying practically, no, if you find yourself in Nardo and the Persians are fighting against the Romans, you can join in? Which actually is an interesting question, because, Jews did serve in foreign armies. Sometimes they were conscripted, but sometimes I think the Lechem Mishnah, the classic commentator on the Rambam, I think was a officer so they're sometimes Jews actually, make career choices of fighting foreign armies, and how does that play out? Of course you could say on Shabbos, of course, once you're in the army, there are pikuach situations. But you're right, it's an interesting question. If you happen to be a citizen in Naharda when it was being attacked, would you sort of see, yourself as a bystander or as, somebody that would be able to fight to protect the Persian Empire? It's an excellent point. I was imagining it more as a hypothetical situation. All right, let's take a look now at the next Gemara. Darish Rav Dustai Demin Biri. So Rav Dustai from Biri made the following exposition, the drush on the pasuk. My dechsiv, what's meant by the pasuk? Vayagidu David Lemor, they told to David saying, right, where's this? I'm just looking here at the exact reference. Shmuel Aleph Chaf Gimel. Okay, so they told to David saying, Hinei Plishtim Nechamim Beki'ilah, the Philistines are fighting in Ki'ilah. Vehema Shosimis HaGranot, and they are sort of attacking the granaries. So Tana, we taught in Brisa, Ki'ilah Iyar Smucha L'Safar Haita. This was a city that was on the border. Vehem Lobo El Iske between, sort of the Jewish territory and the Philistine territory. And they were only it was an issue about it was maybe like a border dispute. It was a question about straw and stubble. It was not that they were trying to kill, they were fighting a war, but ultimately the issues were monetary issues. That they were basically, biting or sniping at, attacking the granaries. The Ksiv, so that was exactly the case about a border city, that it was a monetary dispute. Vaishal David b'Hashem le'mor, and David asked God, saying, Ha'elech v'kesi b'plishtim ha'elech, should I go and fight these Philistines? Vayom Hashem el David, lech, go v'kesi b'plishtim v'oshata et Keilah, and smite the Philistines, and you will save Keilah. So now, presumably, the issue was to illustrate that to assume it was on Shabbos, and you see you're allowed to fight to protect the border city on Shabbos, even if it's just about an issue of straw and stubble. But now the Gemara sort of steps back from that and says, maybe not. It says, "My kami bayale." What was David asking God? Which would mean he was asking the Urim and Tumim of the Kohen Gadol. Is it forbidden or permissible because it was like a Shabbos issue? What are they doing asking God? They should go to a Beis Din. They should go to Shmuel. You go to a rabbi. Lo b'shamayim. Quite interesting. The Gemara is like the other day we had about Mashiach and Eliyahu coming on Shabbos where they go to Chutz Tzchum. Why are you asking God? Halachik Shaila. Okay, Ella, even Yitzlach, he lo matzlach. He wanted to know would he succeed or not. Dikanami tachsivi kesa b'plishtim v'hushatet kila. You will save the city. Shmamina. You see that he was asking whether he would be successful or not. Of course, once you say that, it doesn't prove the issue about defending a border city on Shabbat. Okay, anyway, next Mishnah. So that was going out because you were forced, or going out because of a mitzvah. Forced, you have 4 amot. Mitzvah, you have 2,000 amot. You were traveling. And it was getting late Friday, and you encamped wherever you happened to be, and you got up and you saw later, after it was already Shabbos, presumably like the next morning, and you say, oh my gosh, look, I was right outside the city, I didn't realize, okay, the city was within 2,000 amot from where I camped out here Friday night. Since when Shabbos began, you were not intending to start in the city, or some say not intending to start, not intending to go to the city. You weren't aware that there was a city. You cannot say that you were part of the city. Lo yikanes, you can't go into the city. It doesn't mean you can't go in. It means you're not like the city, right? Meaning, even if you're within the 2,000 amot. So again, here is your, this is 2,000 amot in every direction. You're here in the middle. The city is like right over here. So if you're considered to start in the city, then you get the entire city and 2,000 amot outside of it. But no, you're considered to have started here, not started in the city, so you get to go into the city up to the 2,000 amot line, but no further. That's the first opinion. You do not get to be considered like you started in the city.
You can't go into the city.
You can go, but you can't go fully into the city. You can only go into the city only up to your 2,000 amot.
So if you're 19, or 1,999 amot, then you could go 1 amot.
1 amot into the city, right? Exactly.
Anyway.
Well, so the Gemara says if you don't know, you basically take, an average step, and you assume an average step is an amma, an average stride. Had a laser beam, right? Okay. Anyway, you can't use on Shabbos. Anyway, so
You used it too.
Diva Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yikanes, you can go in. It's like you started in the city. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, my Sayyid, V'nichtas Rabbi Tarfon below Miskavein. And once it happened that Rabbi Tarfon went into a city without intending, meaning he didn't realize that he was encamped outside the city. He found out when he woke up, and it was like he started in the city. Now, I should say that this is basically a kula, meaning everybody agrees that if you started out, if you knew you were in 2,000 amot, you could be considered like one of the people of the city. Now, that in itself is a bit of a chiddush, because if I'm here, I can't say I'm starting my Shabbos 1,900 amos away from where I'm currently standing. It's where you're standing or where you put your Eruv, right? You can't just designate a space even within your 2,000 amot. So here, even if you know the city is there, there's a leniency here that we want to make life easy on you, and we allow it to be that if you're within 2,000 amot, you're considered as a person as of that city. You're considered as an inhabitant of that city. That's a kula we wouldn't normally apply, that we let you designate your space, not somewhere where you are not physically present. But that leniency is only when, according to the Mishnah, Mishnah, you intended to be in that city, or at least you were, according to some Mishnah, aware that that city was there and intending to go to that city, that would allow you to be considered to be an inhabitant of the city. Or that's the debate. If you're completely unaware, that's what's being debated in the Mishnah. Yes?
I'm sorry, I may have forgotten the distinction, but when do we say that once you're in a city, you have access to the entire city as if it were just one point? And when you
start Shabbos in the city. When you start Shabbos in the city, then the whole city counts as like no space, and you have 2,000 amot outside of it. Right, and this leniency is saying if you were outside the city but within 2,000 amot, we'll consider it like you started Shabbos in the city, provided you knew about the city and were intending to go there. But if you were oblivious, then we're going to debate whether it's considered like you started in the city or not. Okay, and you're within 2,000
right in the middle of the city.
What?
And your tchum may end even in the middle of the city.
Right. If it's not like you start in the city, then your tchum could end 3 feet into the city. Okay, so the Mishnah says, Ta'ani with on the Brisa, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'aseh Rabbi Tarvin Shayva, Paderech v'chashchalo. Rabbi Tarvin was once going on the way, and it got dark on Friday. V'lon chutz ha'ir, and he slept right outside the city. Lashachris matza'u roi bakar, and he wasn't aware that it was outside the city. In the morning, some not shepherds, what they be called, cowherds found him. Amrulo, Rabbi, they said to him, Rabbi, look, you're right outside the city. He kanes, go into the city. Nichnos v'yoshav beis hamedrash. So he got up, went into the beis medrash. What do you do on Shabbos? You go into the study hall of the Darshko Yom Kulo, and he's taught the entire day. So you see that even if you're unaware, you can be considered as part of the city. So Amrulo, whatever they said back to him, or those that disagreed, Rabbi Meir said back, Misham Raya, you want to bring a proof from that? How do you know whether he knew he was within the city limits? Just because the cowards told him didn't mean he himself was unaware. Okay, although it does sound like that. Why, the way the story is framed. Oh, or here's a better explanation. Beis Medrash moved up to Tchulahaya. Maybe the Beis Medrash was within his 2,000 amot. Doesn't prove he has the whole city. Okay, so that's what's being debated. Now, somebody slept on the way and he didn't realize it was getting dark. Meaning, forget being part of the city. That's one special case. How are we going to consider you if you weren't aware? But you basically put your head down Friday afternoon and you slept straight through when Shabbos began. Okay, is it considered like that's where you were kone your mukum on Shabbos? On the one hand, you could say, my God, you were physically there and sleeping there. Of course it would be. But there's actually a debate in the Mishnah that you might have to be aware when Shabbos is beginning that this is where you are starting your Shabbos. And if you were unaware and you were sleeping, you're unconscious. You weren't even aware where you were. Okay, you are unconscious. Maybe you do not. That's not defined as establishing your place for your tchum. So, Yesho Paim Amalako Ruach. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says that's where you started your Shabbos. You have 2,000 amot, even if you were unconscious when Shabbos began. The Chachamim say you only have 4 amot. Presumably, you are outside, your original tchum where you would have sort of normally started Shabbos. We'll see about that in a minute. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer Omer v'hu be'emtza'ah. Now, this is the question about how do you measure the 4 amot, which we saw before. The Rabbi Eliezer says you're in the middle, so there's really 2 amot in each direction. That's a point that could have been said anytime we say you only have 4 amot. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda said, again, this is a sub-debate, or a more general debate of how do you measure the 4 amot. Rabbi Eliezer says it's 2 amot in each direction, and Rabbi Yehuda says you can pick 4 amot in any one direction. So it's not a square that's 8 by 8, it's still 4 by 4, but you can define where you begin that 4 by 4, where you are in that 4 by 4 square. Umoda Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees, she'im birolo, once you said I'm going 4 amot this way, she'enu yochel lachzer bo, then you cannot go back to your original place and then pick a different 4 amot. Okay, so what's the moment of picking? Do you actually have to walk or just verbalize? Anyway, that's a sub-debate about how to measure the 4 amot.
Wouldn't the same apply to the 2,000 amot?
No, 2,000 amot, clearly it's in all, that we know it's in all directions. Okay?
But if you go 2,000 amot in that direction,
you can still come back home and go 2,000 in the other direction. Yeah. You're a 2,000 amot, you are in the middle of a square, 4,000 amot by 4,000 amot. That's not debated. Okay, here it's when you have just 4 amot total, where are you in that square?
So why is it
different? Because the idea of 4 amot is an idea like your place is 4 amot. A space is a 4 amot square, like the minimum size of a place. So therefore, whereas, so it's only a square, and the only question is where are you in the square? square. Whereas by the 2,000 amot, the idea is city limits are 2,000 amot outside of the city in every direction. It's a different concept. There's not a concept of a 4,000 amma by 4,000 amma square. There's a concept of a 2,000 amma that, sort of limit of the city, or of your place. So but here the square is 4 by 4, and the question is, where are you? Now, where are we? Let's say you have two people who are chutz l'tchum. We're getting outside the whole issue of sleeping. Two people are chutz l'tchum, and they only have 4 amot. But each of their 4 amot overlap. Right? So these are my 4 amot, these are your 4 amot, we're both stuck outside of the tchum, and they overlap here. I'm in the middle here, you're in the middle here, the 2 amot here, of the 2 amot, we're 4 amot away from each other, these 2 amot overlap. Okay? So, where are we? They can go ahead and bring, and have a picnic in the middle, right? As long as you don't take from your space, and bring into your friend's space. So in this you can share everything, but you cannot go ahead and bring from here into, the space that is not yours. Now, why not? Well, no. Why not? So the simple reason is, there's a complicated Rashi, but the simple reason is that we're going to find out later there's a halacha that your vessels, and your clothes and everything you own are also limited by your tchum. Okay? So assuming that what's within here is your food and your stuff, okay, if you can't place it there, he can't take it there because it's taking the foods outside of the food's tchum, or whatever it is that's being taken out of the tchum. Okay, so you can use the shared space, but you cannot bring stuff into the space that is not shared, even without leaving it, because it's limited by your tchum.
But the food can eat in the middle, and if I'm this guy, I can take it from here to there.
What?
I can't take anything from outside of the shared space.
Right. Right. Anything that's not yours. Right. Okay. Hayu shlosha. Now let's say there were 3 people. Okay. So it's basically it's 1, 2, and then whatever. This third guy here, the guy's in the middle. Right, he's overlapping with the 2 other guys, but the 2 guys at the ends are not overlapping with one another. Okay, so in that case, Hayu Shlosha, the middle one is swallowed between them, he's the one with overlapping. Hu Mutar Imahem, he can eat with each of them, turn one way, eat with one, turn the other, eat with the other. Ve'hein Mutar Imo, they can eat with him. V'shnayim achitzonim asurim zem zeh. But the 2 outer ones who don't overlap cannot sort of, use any shared space together. I'm Rabbi Shimon. Said Rabbi Shimon, what is this like? 3 courtyards which are opening one to another, and they are open into the Rishut HaRabim. So here, the basic example is, now, here's your 3 courtyards. Remember, this is the part that we had before, right? That everybody was saying, I thought we were done with all of that. Okay, anyway, here's your 3 courtyards. Here's the Rishut HaRabim. Okay, so each of them has an opening into the Rishut HaRabim, and they are open into one another. I'll tell you in a minute why it's important that they have an opening to Rishut HaRabim. So in that case, so if there were 2 Eiruvs were made, in theory you can make one big Eiruv for all 3. But what actually happened was, you had one Eruv made like this, and one Eruv made like this. The middle guy made an Eruv with both sides. Okay, so in that scenario, he mutaris imahem, they mutarim ima. So the middle one can use the shared space. Use the shared space with the guy on the left and the guy on the right of the courtyard. But the 2 outer courtyards, I cannot go from here and carry in your space over here. I can carry in the shared space, but I can't carry in your space because I did not make an Eruv with you. And same in the reverse. The reason it's relevant that they're open to Rishut HaRabim is if they weren't all open to Rishut HaRabim, and if basically let's say only this one was open to Rishut HaRabim, and this was the street, then since the access to the inner one is only through the outer one, it forces all of them to make an Eruv together. Okay, because then you can't sort of be independent of each one because you can only get there through the others. We'll see more about that later.
Food, if I'm the one all the way on the left, I wanted to share my food with the one all the way on the right. I can just ask you who's in the middle to bring it.
No.
You can do it with both of us. I just
What?
can't do it with them, but I'm not doing them. I'm doing it through you.
So there it's not a tchum issue of taking the food chutz l'tchum. In terms of a carrying issue,
Meaning it can let you be by Shabbos goy, so to speak, right?
no, what? No. I guess if it's just trying to think, it stopped in. I'll get back to you on that. Okay, let's take a look at the Gemara. By Rava. So Rava asked, Micah's of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. What does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri hold? Who holds that that even when you were unconscious, that's where you started your Shabbos. Micah's of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Mitzvah Kasavar does he hold Chefsei Hefker Kodim Shrisa, that even if something, you saw this before, was ownerless, meaning then it doesn't require any consciousness in order to say that wherever something is, that's where it begins Shabbat. So even if something is ownerless, and I just mentioned to you that even inanimate objects have a tchum. They normally go by their owner, but if they're ownerless, their tchum is where they begin. So even if something is ownerless, konim shvisa, then that defines where it begins. Shabbos is where it is. So therefore, meaning there needs no conscious awareness for something to be defined where it is. Where its place is when Shabbos begins. Ubedinu to leave the and he really could have set his position by vessels that even if it's an inanimate object begins Shabbos where it starts. Certainly a sleeping person. So why were they debating a sleeping person? To tell you the chiddush of the rabbis, because there's more of a reason to say that a sleeping person should work better than an inanimate object. Because you could say, had he been awake, this clearly would have been where he started. So even asleep, it's where he started. Kamash malad delos, and therefore we're telling you that the rabbis go so far to say that even a sleeping person, but the one does not work. But the one who says it does work would go so far to say it even works by an inanimate object. I should point out that in the inanimate object case, it's a chumrah, because if you say the inanimate object is kona shvisa, you're limited how far you can bring it. If you don't say it's kona shvisa, then it acquires its sort of where it starts Shabbat. But if you say an inanimate object does not sort of establish itself, then it only would be defined, let's say if I picked it up on Shabbat, it'd be defined by me, which is how I want it defined, because then I can take it wherever I can go. Okay, but here, presumably, it's the flip. You want to begin Shabbos presumably where you fell asleep, and that's where Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is saying that it works. That's one way of understanding it, that he would even say the same thing by an inanimate object. O Dilma, or perhaps, if it was really inanimate, then it would not define it where it started Shabbos, where it happened to physically be. So you need intention. So why does it work here if you're asleep? Because if you had been awake, you would have Yoshe Nami Kana, even if you are asleep. Okay, so yes, it requires at least potential intention, and a sleeping person is different than an inanimate object. So we don't know what the reason of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri is. Is it a special case of a person, or would he even say it by an inanimate object? So I'm Rav Yosef Tashma. I'm going to try to prove to you that Rav Yosef says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri would say it even by an inanimate object. It rained. Now, if it rained right before Yantav, same would be Yantav or Shabbos. This was just the case, was Yantav. They are 2,000 amot from wherever the rain fell. You want to collect the rain or whatever, so it's defined by where it fell. Okay.
Assuming it's not like flowing, otherwise you can't tell which is
right. Now, if it was Erev Yantav, Yantav, it fell on Yantav, so it didn't start Shabbos. It didn't start Yantav anywhere. It does not define by a tchum. Harim kiraglei kol adam. It goes by anybody, which means there's a question exactly about what it means, but for our purposes, we'll say it means whoever picks it up and takes it. So if it fell on Erev Yantav, it's defined. It's 2,000 amot where it fell. If it fell on Yantav, so obviously you define Tchumim when Yantav begins, and it wasn't down here when Yantav began, so therefore maybe it's what? We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Nolad. So anyway, in that case, since it's not defined when Yantav began, it would be defined by the person who took possession of them, because all of your objects, and this now becomes one of your objects, is defined by your Tchum. Okay, so that seems to be a clear example that an inanimate object, the rain, is defined if it was there on Erev Erev Yontiv is defined by where it began Yontiv. So the Gemara says like this. If Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds that even inanimate objects that are ownerless establish their place, so how many Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? So Rabbi Yochanan. So at least we now know who the author of this Mishnah is. The author of this issue about the rain. It's Rabbi Yochanan. If Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, it doesn't say ownerless objects, so we don't know of anybody else who might say it. So Hamani, who's saying this case by the rain, that the rain goes by where it fell? Lo Rabbi Yochanan, it's not Rabbi Yochanan, but lo Rabbanan, and not the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan don't even allow a sleeping guy. So clearly what the Gemara is saying is we have a Mishnah, a Braita rather, that there is some Tana out there that holds that ownerless objects define Shabbos where they began. And since that is, we would like to attribute that to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri because we have nobody else to attribute it to. So Yosef Abaye, so Abaye was sitting, the Kamar Lalahai Shmait, and telling over this discussion. I'm only Rav Safra Abaye, so Rav Safra said to Abaye, V'diyona de Geshamim hasmuchim li'ir askinan, v'anshe oso ha'ir daitam alayhu. Maybe, they saw it was about to rain, and therefore it was not that it was unintentional. The people were actually knowing, oh great, it's going to rain, and then we'll be able to collect the rain on Yom Tov, etc. And therefore it's like they consciously put it down wherever it fell.
Always say that.
Okay? No. If it's completely hefker and you're unaware of it.
No, I should always have in mind if it's going to rain. My mind is on it.
No. But actually we're saying that implicitly it was. Okay? So therefore you cannot say that it is completely like hefker in the sense that, where there was no intentionality. So Amar Le, he said back to him, Lo sakadaitich. That doesn't make sense. Now we taught in the Mishnah, Borsho yachid kiragle yachid. If you have a private owned well, then it goes by the owner. V'shel oso ha'ir, if it's owned by the city, kiragle oso ha'ir, then even if individuals in the city made their own private eruvei tchumim, it goes by the whole city, means 2,000 amot around the city. Even though you made a tchum and you're going to go further to the east and you're going to go further to the west, if it's owned by the city, it goes by the general tchum of the city. Okay? So, fine, no chiddush yet. V'shel ole Bavel, if it is for the people that are coming up from Bavel, meaning it's not owned by a city, it's out in the middle of the road of the Rishus HaRabim and the highway, and it's basically hefker. Anybody can use it who's taking it. Tiragle hamimale, it goes by the person who fills it up, which means that it's not konesh shvisa. The water in this well that is there for ole Bavel, for the travelers, is ownerless, as opposed to the private or the one owned by the city. And therefore, it says it's not limited by 2,000 amot from the well. It goes from the space of the person that picks it up and takes possession of it. So that's the idea that chefsei hefker are not konesh visa. Vitanya, that's one braita. But we have another braita that says, Borsho Shvatim, if you have a well owned by the Shvatim, meaning by Klal Yisrael, okay, so that's considered to base, it's interesting. You could have said that's, owned. It's owned by all of Klal Yisrael. But all of Klal Yisrael doesn't have one tchum. So that is seen as effectively the same as being ownerless. So you have this well that's owned by Klal Yisrael. Okay. Yeshem apayim amalakol ruach. It goes 2,000 amot from from the well. So you have one braita that says an ownerless well, it goes by the guy who picked up the water on Shabbos. You have another one that says it goes by 2,000 amot from the well. So this is exactly the debate of ownerless objects. Do they define their place based on where they start at 2,000 amot in every direction, or do they not define their space until somebody picks them up? 1 minute. So how do you deal with this contradiction? Elav shmamina. It must be. It's a debate of Tanaim. How Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri? How Rabbanan? That this is the same debate we have in our Mishnah. So basically, we know there's evidence out there that there are Tanaim that hold that cheftzei hefker is konesh shvisa. Okay, by this case of the well, or by this case of the rain, and we know it's debated. And therefore it makes sense to map that debate on the debate of our Mishnah about the guy who fell asleep. Okay? So Amalei, so he said back to him, I think Abaye to Rav Safra, Hachikama, Rav Safra, no, not Abaye to, who was talking to who? Rav Safra said to Abaye, so Abaye said back, 1 minute, I'm getting confused who said to what. Anyway, Hachikama, Rav Safra, I'm sorry, wait a minute. No, I skipped a line. That's why. Rav Yosef. Okay, so that was what Rav Safra said to Abai. So now Abai came to Rav Yosef. Amalei, and he said to Rav Yosef, "Hakikam Rav Safra." This is what Rav Safra said to me. He said, maybe they were planning on it raining, and he tried to dismiss the idea of Cheftzei Hefker. And I responded to him that there clearly is a position out there of Cheftzei Hefker, this issue of the wells, and therefore I wanted to map it on the debate of Rabbi Yochanan ben Yuri and the rabbis. Amalei, so Rav Yosef said to Abaye, "V'maylo temalei migufa." Why didn't you tell him from the very case of the rain itself that clearly it's not that they were planning on it raining and that defined it? Why? You wanted to say, Rav Papa wanted to say that you can't prove from the rain case because maybe they knew it was going to rain and therefore it was like they had intended for it, for where it fell. If that's true, then why would it say that the rain goes 2,000 amot from where it fell? It should be like the people of the city, because then it becomes as if it were owned by the city. So meaning, again, just to step back, right, the Breita says that if the rain falls on Erev Yontiv, it is defined by where it fell. So that wanted to be a proof that Cheftzei Hefker are Konesh Shvisa. And the answer was, no. Maybe it's that the people in the city knew it was going to fall, and it's like they put it down there. So the Gemara says no. So Rav Yosef said back no, because if it's their Konesh Shvisa by themselves, that explains why the Breita says they're 2,000 amot from where they fell. But if it's like we, the people of the city, put it down there, then it's like it's owned by we of the people of the city, and it should be defined by our 2,000 amot, not the 2,000 amot where it fell. So the upshot of all of this is that there's Tanaitic evidence that there's a position out there that Cheftzei Hefker are Konesh Shvisa. Either the rain goes by where it fell, or the water of the well is 2,000 amot from where it began. There's other positions out there that no, it's not Konesh Shvisa, and it goes by the person that takes possession of them. And the Gemara is saying, let's map that debate on the sleeping person and say the issue of the sleeping person is not just because he could have woken up. Ultimately, this is the debate of do you need consciousness at all, or even inanimate objects? Can they be Konesh Shvisa where they are or not? So we'll continue this tomorrow.
Can a guy who's asleep make a time? I'm going to take a nap. Where do I end up? That's where I want to have.
Yeah, presumably, if he went to sleep knowing that